And when I talk about it today, I also worked in substance abuse for quite a while too, and they have the dual diagnosis, mental health and substance abuse, but in our system we've had it the longest, much longer than the MH and the substance abuse system. So when I talk about it, I'm talking about a mental illness and some type of developmental disability. What we need to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter what level of an intellectual disability an individual has, because they can experience a mental illness, whether they are profoundly disabled or not. They can still experience a mental illness. And they can also experience all types of mental illness too, from adjustment disorders to depressive disorders to psychotic disorders. So when you look at some of the common symptoms, and this is typically more with people that have the more severe, but they have hallucinations. Could be they can hear things, they can see things, they can feel things, they can taste things. Very easily agitated, very easily agitated. Very restless. You see people up and down and moving and just very restless. Delusions. They thought broadcasting. I mean, if I was delusional right now, which some people would debate whether or not, but I could stand up here and not say a word, and you would get everything that I was trying to convey to you, because I could broadcast my thoughts out to you. Or I might feel like you're out to get me, those persecutory delusions. Delusions of reference, where events, people, objects take on some type of significant meaning to them. Thought insertion, where, if I'm broadcasting out to you, then you can also insert thoughts into my head, or take thoughts out. Control people, very grandiose, religious delusions. When people have a thought disorder, and that's what's associated with the major mental illnesses, they have loose associations. And what that means is that they're jumping around. I mean, there's no connection with what they say. They can be talking about the weather, then they're talking about their family, and they can be they just jump. A lot of jumping around. Not a lot of content on what they're talking about. When people have a dual diagnosis, and we still hear it, it's both systems have to work together. In the mental health system, growing up in the mental health system, we always talked about their primary diagnosis. What's their primary diagnosis? A lot of that had to do with billing, because you had to have a primary diagnosis out of the DSM in order to get reimbursed for the services. But when you're talking about people with a dual diagnosis, that kind of concept, really, you need to forget about that, because it really doesn't do you any good. If they're eligible for services in both systems, then they're eligible for services. And in the mental health system, the only eligibility requirement is that they have a mental health problem, something that's in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. When you look at the department, they do provide services at hospitals, and then they have community support. They have several hospitals across Ohio, the largest chain of hospitals, actually. And again, these figures are a little bit outdated. I think they're not serving quite 1,100 people now, but they still serve a lot of people in the hospital. And they serve a lot of folks who are dually diagnosed in the hospital. When people with a dual diagnosis get into the hospital, they tend not to get out because of a lot of different reasons. I've seen where county boards don't want to step up to help because if they're in the hospital, then it's not costing the county board a dime. But it's costing that local mental health board, I don't know what their cost is now, $600 a day for that person to be in the hospital. Local tax money. So when somebody from Franklin County goes in the hospital, the Franklin County Adam Board pays for that. So there's really no incentive to get our folks out of the hospital sometimes. In the mental health system, there's like 50 boards. So you have a lot of multi-county boards. They, again, as I mentioned earlier, they don't provide services. They're prohibited by law from providing services. So what they do is they fund services locally. They're also responsible to plan for services, contract, and monitor those services. They raise, $260 million a year or more in local levies. Their boards are made up of different types of professionals, consumers, family members. And in 1 year, 1998, they spent more than $45 million on community services for people that had a dual diagnosis, which represented about 7.5% of the total community cost. So again, it's real expensive to serve people with a dual diagnosis. In order to access those services, in the mental health system, you just call up the agency in your community and set up an appointment. They'll be asking you a few questions, and if you hear them say, well, we don't serve people with disabilities, then you need to say, well, let me talk to your client's rights person or something. Because again, they can't refuse to see people with disabilities. So again, in every board, every agency has a client's right officer. If you can't find services, you can call the local Adam Board, Mental Health Board, and they can direct you to those services.